Hi students, we are back for another discussion of some sociology topics. We're looking at macro and micro connections. I probably don't need to remind you about that by now. You're probably thinking about that. The first thing that comes to your mind when you're like, I wonder what we're talking about in sociology this week. Well, this week we're going to look at the education system. This is the first half of chapter 12. So we looked at religion last week. We're looking at education this week. We just kind of flip-flopped that chapter in the order that they appear in the book. So just make sure you look at the correct section. So education, the education system, this is a macro level concept, a macro level plan, a macro level matrix, so to speak, that all things educational fall underneath in the United States. So what I mean is you can definitely lump K through 12 education into the education system, but also pre-K, also daycare facilities, things that take care of early childhood development, or things like higher education, our community college and technical college that you are attending right now, or a four-year university, a master's level or a doctoral program, cultural exchanges with other universities overseas, or a high school exchange program. These kinds of things are all smaller parts that create micro-scale experiences within something called the education system. So the education system is a macro scale part of the social structure that takes care of certain needs that a society has. In other words, it's a social institution. I've just given you the definition for social institution and substituted the word education system in there because it's one of the macro scale parts of our social structure that props up other components of our social structure, like family and marriage, like the economy, like religion that we've talked about so often before. So the education system is one of those macro scale parts of the social structure that really exists as this great big umbrella kind of covering over every school district, every university system, homeschool alliances, all of those things that I'm rattling off are subcomponents of the larger education system in the United States. And education systems exist throughout the world. I actually had in my hand until just a minute ago, I tossed it down on my desk here in front of me, a brochure about the education system in Saudi Arabia that I got at a trip to Washington, D.C. back when you were allowed to travel to Washington, D.C., that I had just some comparisons to make about this overview of the education system in Saudi Arabia as a comparison to the education system here in the United States. So on the board behind me, I've got a paraphrase of the definition for the education system that you will read about in your book. It says all of the same things as what your book does, but I've kind of given a little bit more detail toward the end so that we can use this definition of education system with a little bit more clarity about how other aspects of the macro scale social structure can affect your micro scale experiences in the education system. You'll see what I'm talking about here in just a second. So let's look at this definition that I've got on the board. So the education system is the systematic, organized structure of transmitting knowledge and skills to the people in society who are supposed to get those knowledge and skills. So here's the part that's really not expressly stated in our chapter that depending upon the social facts that exist in one nation to the next. Remember, culture is not the same from one place to the next. So depending upon what the social norms are, what the attitudes about gender and human rights are, what the attitudes are, just the social facts in general. Remember, social facts means the patterned way of thinking, feeling, and acting that exists on the macro scale, and it creates micro scale life experience for us. It guides our micro scale life experience. So for instance, in some countries of the world, in particular, I'm thinking about countries in equatorial Africa and just south of the equatorial line in Africa, there are many cultures there where the gender roles that people are obligated to fill based on the macro scale social norms associated with their sex category and the macro scale social facts that are, that determine what behaviors and actions and thoughts and correct pathways or correct lines of thinking are supposed to be, look at my air quotes there, in that place. Many of these countries that I mentioned do not allow females to go to education past a certain age in their life, which usually corresponds to having their menstrual cycle, because family, that we've talked about a couple weeks ago, is usually seen as the primary role for females in society. Education is usually associated as a primary role of males in society because males are supposed to work outside the home. Are you hearing some of the themes that we talked about during the family unit and how it connects with the way education system is designed and organized in other places? If you can see the connection with those traditional, I'm using a lot of air quotes already in this lecture, with that traditional family economic structure of female does domestic economic functions and males do public economic functions to form the nuclear family. Another air quote. That I shouldn't have put air quotes around that word though, because that's a vocabulary word. So make sure that you know that one for the final exam. But anyway, those ideal or traditional economic structures of the family unit with a female head of household, domestic affairs, and a male head of like outside economic finance affairs, those norms, that pattern of social facts translates very readily into other cultures also. And so there are many societies in equatorial Africa and equatorial Africa, among other places, Saudi Arabia being one of them. One of the reasons why I was so interested, in this particular brochure when they were handing them out. Many other places where religious ideology says that females have a certain position within social structure in general, the education system sometimes is not designed to include females as part of it. So for instance, traditionally, Saudi Arabia was one of those countries, but in this brochure, you can learn that the education system has been redesigned. It was I got this like in 2011 or 12. I can't remember. It's an older brochure, okay? So I don't know what the newer ones say. But what this brochure will explain to you is that the education system has recently been redesigned to include females all the way up through the college level. And they are really, touting themselves about the fact that they have included girls in their education system, okay? So they have a whole section about girls' education, right? You wouldn't expect to see that, a section on boys' education and girls' education in the United States, because we lump that together. People have the same or the equal right to that public education, at least K through 12 education in the United States. Other places, though, do not. And this brochure goes on to talk about how wonderful it is that girls are now included in education, but as they split apart but they are taught in separate facilities, and they also have separate textbooks, because sometimes girls don't need to know certain things that boys need to know and vice versa. So it refers to the separate textbooks that they use, or used. Maybe that's different now, right? But this was like 2011, I think, when I picked up this brochure. So please know that in sociology, just like I told you with religion, we need a really, really, really general definition of these social institutions, because most of the time these social institutions exist almost everywhere on the planet, but they take a different form because culture is different from one place to the next. So this is why I kind of have a modified or a little bit more detailed definition here of what the education system is, so that it will bring to mind for us the fact that the way we do it in the United States is not necessarily similar at all to the way that they do it other places, okay? But the education system, nonetheless, where education is controlled by the government or supported by social norms in general, like it is in the US, it is a systematic, organized method for transmitting knowledge and skills that the norms of society mandate all people or certain people should have. Okay, and so that's why it's written like this. Because for those in society who are supposed to participate. Well, what is included in the knowledge and skills? Basic knowledge. I shouldn't have written that. Well, look at me. I wrote those words over again. Sorry about that. But knowledge like ABC, 1, 2, 3, reading, writing, arithmetic, right? So that's basic knowledge. And in the United States, as our national norm, we expect people to have a minimum of a high school diploma. Now remember, not everybody follows norms, so that doesn't mean that everybody does have a high school diploma, and you're looking at one of them. I did not finish my high school diploma on time, and I honestly have never gone back to get my GED. Higher education at that time did not require a graduation stamp. It required certain core courses that anybody, if you wanted to just get those core courses and go on to college, which is what I did, anybody could do that. That wasn't really the norm. I was deviant in my case. I was supposed to want to have a senior year. I was supposed to want to go to prom. I was supposed to want to do all the social things that aren't necessarily part of the design of the education system, but kind of side effects, social side effects, socialization side effects, peer group side effects of the education system. So the education system is designed specifically to transmit knowledge, ABC, 1, 2, 3, reading, writing, arithmetic, and skills. Do you have certain skills and exposure to certain technology that your parents, your grandparents, etc. Do not have? Yes, like probably many of you could do these videos that I'm doing for you. I mean, I think that I'm like super advanced just because I can upload something to YouTube, but I've got an old-fashioned dry erase board, and that's only because my older old-fashioned chalkboard upstairs, oh yes, chalk, do y'all even know what that is? With like a green board back here that sounds like a stone when you're knocking on it because it's a stone. Like I have that upstairs, and the only reason you're not looking at that right now is because this one's easier to see on YouTube. But I'm sure that many of you know all kinds of little animation software package things and how to do all kinds of video edits so you don't have to hear me sneeze or say or my cat interrupting a video or something like this. How is it and why is it that you know about these things and I don't? Well, they are technological innovations that have occurred in your lifetime and that are outside of the scope of my educational experience. I didn't have them in my household growing up. They weren't invented yet. They weren't in the school. Some of the things that had been invented that I didn't have in my household were in the school. And so I got skills about how to do those certain things. There are also life skills classes, computer skills classes, shop classes, all kinds of things that aren't necessarily about reading, writing, and arithmetic, but about just getting by in life. Finance classes, home economics classes, those kinds of things. So the education system is designed to transmit the certain amount of knowledge and skills that you are, I'm going to do air quotes again, supposed to have in that country's system of norms. Okay? But there's also more that the education system systematically transmits to people, and that is cultural competency. Now, what this means is that culture is not the same everywhere, and especially in a place like the United States, where we have wonderful and gorgeous diversity among our population. That diversity means that there are some rough edges maybe between us that we are unaware of based on our own household micro-level experiences. So think about all the different backgrounds and religious systems and nationalities and ethnicities, etc., even gender fluidity and all this kind of stuff that we have as part of our system of norms in the United States. And without exposure to these kinds of things, we are not very tolerant, we are not very inclusive, we certainly don't allow for equity or equitable distribution of opportunity when we are closed to those diversity opportunities. And so, for instance, education gives us exposure to diverse groups so that we are much more tolerant and aware. The cultural awareness of differences helps us be much more tolerant and inclusive in policy making. Also, each country has its own unique history, has its own unique holidays, symbolism. You know, we have things like the bald eagle, or we have things that are religious holidays that are seen as cultural holidays also, like Christmas, for instance, or Easter, that we make art projects. You know, I don't know about what you've done recently, but we used to make like little Santa Claus faces with cotton balls and stuff out of construction paper when I was little, or when I did substitute teaching for third graders, which almost killed me, but I survived.